on the air and on the ground, bringing you the voice of young people. You're listening to KIC Radio.
Hello and welcome to Back to the South Bank podcast. This is, well, you know what we're going to say. We sound like a broken record most weeks here. We've had two games since we last joined you, Newcastle and Chelsea, and we've conceded 6 goals across the last 2 matches. As usual, Jacob, how are we feeling?
Tired. That goes for a physical sense and just of the football. I was unfortunate enough to make the trip to Stamford Bridge last night. So got in at stupid hours of the morning this morning. Was not worth it. But yeah, as you say, it feels like we could just almost have to don't do this podcast. We could just upload any of the last couple of weeks and just relay it with a new skin, really, because it's the same old. As you say, we've conceded 3 goals all 3 of our last 3 Premier League games. We've conceded 3 goals. 9 goals over those 3 games. It's really poor, to say the least.
Yeah, it's just not good enough with Wolves at the moment. 9 goals conceded in our last 3 and only 1 scored. And I have to say, we'll get to it later, the goal, but we were gifted it, really, I thought. Newcastle midweek, I'll touch on briefly before we move on to yesterday's result. Let's look at Newcastle. The refereeing, I think, was quite poor overall. But I don't think we played too badly overall. Just certain attackers in the Wolves squad can't seem to finish their dinner. Who stands out to you when I say can't finish their chances, Jacob?
Every single one of them, to be fair. You mentioned the referee, and I thought the refereeing was poor again last night as well. I was pretty irate in that away end. But you mentioned you didn't think that the scoreline really reflected the game, but for me that's the most concerning aspect of. We said that about Nottingham Forest, the scoreline didn't reflect the game. Newcastle scoreline didn't reflect the game. Chelsea were okay against us. They weren't good, but that's all they had to be. And for me that's the most concerning thing, where teams don't have to be good to put 3 goals past us and to win. But back to your point of who stands out, obviously Hee-Chan Hwang is. Honestly, I said at half-time in that Newcastle game that I never want to see him in a Wolves shirt again, because it was quite honestly a disgraceful performance. Just unable to take on a man, unable to find a 2-yard pass. Their first goal comes from us committing men forward and a sloppy pass from Hwang. I also feel that in the past few weeks, as much as I want to like him, Jørgen Strand Larsen has been miles off it in these past few games, to the point where it's getting really frustrating. We'll touch on it more, the Chelsea game, because I think that's the worst he's really delved into, I think, in a Wolves shirt.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think all our attackers just look extremely low on confidence at the moment. And like you said, teams only have to play okay to put 3 past us. I think it really shows we are probably sleepwalking into relegation. And I think our owners only have themselves to blame. But enough of the Newcastle negativity. Let's move on to Chelsea, where our misery was compounded yet again. Let's start. Wolves Chelsea. Did Wolves even touch the ball in the opening 15 minutes? Well, a lot of early Chelsea pressure. Jørgen Strand Larsen probably had our best quote-unquote chance of that first 15 minutes. That wasn't even a chance. He got brilliantly tackled by Trevor Chalobah on his 150th career appearance, choosing to put in a monster performance against Wolves. But what sums it up, in that first 15 minutes, Chelsea had 35 touches to 2 of Wolves. Jacob, how did you feel sat in the stands at Stamford Bridge?
Relieved it was still 0-0. Shocked it was still 0-0. It was frustrating though, because from the stands, me and my dad both said, I can see from the stands every Chelsea attack is the same thing. They start with Neto on the one wing, Madueke on the other. the ball switches over to that winger, whether it be Neto, whether it be Madueke. They'll then take 2 steps inside, which is then shuffled our defence over, and find Cole Palmer in that space. And it's every attack. It's so easy to defend against. Well, I know I'm saying it's easy to defend against, well, obviously playing against world-class footballers. But if I can see that from the shed end, the other end of the pitch, surely they should clock on. And in fairness, I think they did, as we saw by the Aitnuri Semedo switch of sides, which I thought was a bold move by Pereira, but actually, in all fairness, worked. I think that was one of the most positive things about last night, because Ryan Aitnuri was struggling to live with Madueke in that first bit. Which way around was it? No, he was struggling to live with Neto, wasn't he? And then he switched.
It was Madueke. Yeah, you were right.
But yeah, he was really struggling to live with him. But it sums up where the only real touch I remember was having that first 20 minutes was Ryan Aitnuri breaking forwards and getting to a point where he just didn't know what to do with the ball. You know, we get to the edge of the box, everyone's shouting, just have a shot. And he tries playing the ball to Sarabia, who's, you know, almost just daydreaming, it seems, at this point. And he just kind of stood there. And the attack just fizzles out. I mean, I don't know I'm interested to hear what the commentators were making of it on the telly, because to me, it seemed like one-way traffic in that first 20 minutes.
Yeah, it really was, Jacob. I hate to say it. The stats were no better. Like I just said, 35 Chelsea touches to the 2 of Wolves in that opening 15, and it didn't really get any better from there. You mentioned that run by Aitnuri where he drives forward through the heart of the Chelsea team. That was probably our most positive move in that time period in the game. And Aitnuri had originally 2 options, both of who seemed to slow down their runs. Sarabia and I'm not sure who the other one was, maybe Strand Larsen. But they both slowed down their runs, allowed the Chelsea defence to get back into position. And then he decides to lay it off to Sarabia. And do not get me started on Pablo Sarabia. I'm absolutely sick of seeing that man in the squad, let alone on the team sheet. I think he's honestly one of the most negative footballers I've watched at Wolves recently. His cameo against Spurs lives long in the memory, but it's probably the only good thing he's done in a Wolves shirt. Every time he got the ball in that game, he would turn and pass all the way back to our centre halves, killing absolutely any momentum in every attack. That Aitnuri chance you mentioned, it's bold to even call that a chance, in honesty, just as entering their final third, but it just shows how bleak things have got for Wolves recently. I'm just really sick of Sarabia. There was one attempt where he had the ball on the right-hand side and played it all the way back again and ended up playing Nicholas Jackson through on goal. How do you manage to do that as a winger in the final third? It's just shocking. I think there was a lot of communication issues as well. There was one notable one before Chelsea's first goal where Matt Doherty and Sarr had a complete mismatch of communication, and Doherty had to clear into the stand. But what is exactly going on with communication and Jose Sarr and his defence, Jacob? I think that was a big talking point of this game.
Yeah, if we go through individually, I thought Santiago Bueno, probably the poorest game he's had in a good run of games for him, though, to be fair, so I don't want to dig him out too much. Doherty, I actually felt kind of sorry for yesterday. I think, obviously, still this right centre-back experiment has probably gone on too long, but that's not his fault. And to me, him and João Gomez were the only 2 that stood out as players who looked like they wanted to get something out of that game last night, wanted to bring that team forward and get something. You know, João Gomez, bless him, he was doing the running for 2 people in midfield against a 3-man midfield, one of which is arguably the best midfielder in the league this season. And then Agbadou, again, still on that long side, doesn't look comfortable on the ball, but physically looked good at times. Still, I think he's adjusting to the Premier League, still switches off every so often, which you can't afford to do. I think actually the second goal comes from Agbadou switching off and that cross being allowed to be put in, which we'll get to later for Cucurella. So I think that's just so poor. Obviously, we've mentioned the switching of the two players, Semedo and Aït-Nouri. I thought Semedo was okay on that other side. Still didn't look comfortable, but that was more of a problem when we went forward, him not being able to get those crosses in, etc. Whereas Ryan Aït-Nouri, I mentioned to you yesterday, I think hasn't been spoken enough how poor that man has been since the turn of the year. I know scored against Bristol City, but come on now, it was 2 yard out header, and I don't think he looked particularly great in that game either. So yeah, for me, we just look like a team that, as you've said many times, sleepwalking towards relegation. That's what really frustrated me about yesterday, and we'll get onto it more when we're summing up the whole match, what I thought of it at the end.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said, in honesty. I think Aït-Nouri has been quite poor for a couple of weeks now, but it feels unfair almost to be saying that about one of our best players, but it is true. I think a lot of our squad have undoubted quality. We've seen it time and time again, but I've not seen such an emotional set of players in a Wolves shirt before as this squad. They are completely carried by momentum. I remember whenever we're in good form, like last season, we have to look that far back now. The momentum was terrific. The squad were playing their hearts out week in, week out, fighting for another goal anyway to come back. Even if they were 3-0 down and pulled it back to 3-2 in the last 10 minutes, they'd fight. All that fight's gone now. João Gomez seeming like one of the only players with a bit of heart, with a bit of fire in his belly. I completely agree. He was phenomenal yesterday. I think as much as Kieran Shrewsbury Hall would have been glad to have his first Premier League start, João Gomez ate him up in that first half, especially. And Moises Caicedo, probably, like you said, one of the best midfielders in the Premier League this season, really finding his feet at Chelsea now. João Gomez also made him struggle at times, but when it was just João Gomez, I'm really struggling to find where his support was coming from. Andre did look off his pace, really. He struggled yesterday, but at the same time, his replacements weren't there. Why are we not seeing another midfielder like Tommy Doyle or even Lamina? I hate to say it, with his physicality, although I understand he won't be in the squad till after the transfer window closes if he stays at the club, according to Vitor Pereira. I really think Tommy could have made a difference yesterday. I think we were really negative. We didn't play any forward passes. Tommy could have at least played a nice long ball up to someone to find a marker, but even the wingers weren't running. Strand Larsen's hold-up play was average at best, and we really just struggled to create anything at all until the last few minutes of that first half, where we had a small period of pressure. Jake, why does it take us so long to wake up in these games in an attacking sense?
It's so frustrating because we shown in those last 10 minutes or so of that first half that Chelsea are vulnerable. You get at them, we hurt them. You know, the crowd, we were starting to get up. Mateus Cunha was giving it over to the away fans, which obviously we love Cunha, but he disgraced himself yesterday, not only with a subpar performance, but as Vitor Pereira mentioned, his body language, which I'm sure will be a massive talking point as we go on in the podcast. And then Strand Larsen, you mentioned, I thought disgraced himself yesterday. I think he is a player that should, in all honesty, just go home and research someone like a Liam Delap. You know, a physical player who should be getting himself around, who's getting knocked off the ball by people that he should be getting knocked off the ball by. I think Dewsbury Hall was more physical than him yesterday. I think the guy in front of me quite comically said, but it's quite true, Strand Larsen's about 6'4", but he jumps at about 5'10". The guy just doesn't know how to jump. Just because you're tall doesn't mean the ball's going to land on your head every time. The one time he did jump, he got the flick on. And the weak stuff and everything, just he's too weak for a guy that big for me. His hold-up play was not good enough. I think average is a compliment to it. I think it was so poor, and I do feel bad for him at times. He is doing a graveyard shift, it feels, where players are launching the ball up, and expected him to do something with it, but you've still got to be doing so much better. I go back to I was thinking of it last night when I got home. That Manchester City game, where's that Strand Larsen that we saw that week? Even that Tottenham game where he came on, he was immense. That second half. But these past three games, we go back to Nottingham Forest, missed an abundance of chances. I'll let him off because I'd be more worried if he weren't getting those chances. Newcastle, we might as well have been playing with 10 men because he was non-existent. And it was the same last night. And I want to single out all three attackers. I think Sarabia wasn't his worst game, but the fact that's not one of your worst games speaks volumes because he was poor. Mateus Cunha, that probably was his worst game. I thought it was pathetic from Cunha yesterday. Whether it's an injury, whether it's an agent chirping his ear, whatever it is, yesterday was unacceptable. Walking around dragging his knuckles. I know. I'll go back over to you. You mentioned about Vitor Pereira trying to give some words of wisdom to Cunha, and his reception to it. Well, let you take the lead. You said didn't seem very good.
Yeah, we'll definitely be moving on to Vitor Pereira and Cunha's words in and around and off the pitch later on in the podcast in more detail. But to touch briefly on what I mentioned to you in the first half, there was at one point where I'm not sure if it was just before or after the Semedo and Ait-Nouri switch. Vitor was obviously tweaking his tactics to adjust to Chelsea. A bit of credit to Vitor Pereira. I think he is a manager who does know what he's talking about. At times I'm questioning him in games and after them when I have had time to process the results and the way we played. But I think credit where it's due. I think, like you said, the Semedo and Ait-Nouri switch was warranted. I think it stopped a lot of those crosses inside, but Chelsea adjusted to that within seconds, and all the players had to do was take 2 steps inward and cross it in on their preferred foot for that in-swinging ball, and our defence didn't know how to cope. But to address back to what your original point was, Vitor Pereira holding his tactics board, showing Cunha what to do. And Cunha, at times he's looking away. At times he's just looking at his teammates, barely listening, kind of one ear in one ear, out the other. And he looked lazy. He looked like his body language was just awful. I'm not sure what's going through his head. I'm not sure if, like you said, it's his agent chirping in his ear, who seems to be on speed dial to Fabrizio Romano at the moment, may I add. I'm not sure if it's the fact he's just come back from the flu. He did look quite ill, in fairness. He had a very red nose, like many of us have had the past few weeks with what's been going around. But I just don't think it's acceptable, in honesty. I think you can't show that when you're one of the team captains, when you're supposed to be the man who's carrying the club on their back at the moment. That's a lot of pressure to put on one player, don't get me wrong, but when you've showed the highs that Cunha has this season, being the shining light in a really dark spell for Wolves, I think you have to up your game and have the mentality to set the team right.
Yeah, I'd fully agree. And I want to mention that this isn't a criticism that I have just come across, or us as a podcast have just come across. You can go back to our earlier podcasts where even when Cunha was playing well, we mentioned his body language at times, his constant moaning to the fourth official, his constant petulance when it's not going his way. Yeah, it's frustrating. The fact that everything about this contract saga's coming through Fabrizio Romano says to me that it is agent-based. Because as we know, Fabrizio gets all of his sources through agents. So that says to me that a lot of it's agent-based, but an agent isn't, making you put a corner in that trickles to the front post and doesn't come in play. Speaking of corners, we get our goal off one, but I don't want to give the corner credit because it's ridiculously poor goalkeeping from Robert Sanchez.
Terrible.
But we aren't complaining in that way. I'm sorry to cut you off there, but what's frustrating was we didn't carry on that momentum, getting that goal at the end of the second half. And Chelsea were a wounded animal. I could tell in that first 5 minutes of that second half, they were expecting us to come out on. And it was only when they realised that we're not, they stepped up and they were able to get going. So that to me is just really poor. It's almost like, oh, we'll try and hold what we have, which you're not going to do with a leaky defence away at Stamford Bridge, unfortunately.
Jacob, you took the words right out of my mouth. That is exactly what I said to my family at halftime. When we were talking about the shocking body language from some of the players. But really, Chelsea looked very vulnerable, I have to agree. Going back to the goal, I want to touch on Matheus Cunha's set piece deliveries. I think they were terrible all night. I think terrible's generous. Half of the corners were going out of play. How do you manage that? It seems he's trying for the Olympico goal he scored against United with each of those deliveries. Why are you doing that? For the sake of the team, why are you doing that? Chelsea couldn't handle the set pieces perfectly when they did go into the box, but half of the time they were missing the box, either overhit or underhit. I really thought it was poor from him. Even the goal itself, I think the corner itself is terrible. Straight into the hands of Sanchez, and Wolves get lucky enough that he drops the ball. And then it bounces off someone's back into the path of Matt Doherty. One thing I wanted to touch on for that goal, though, an unsung hero for that is Agbadou. To create the space for Matt Doherty to actually tap home, Agbadou anticipates the ball falling out of Sanchez's hand, sees him lose his grip, and he pushes like 2 or 3 Chelsea players out of the way to create the space for Matt Doherty to just get his foot there. Incredible strength from the Ivorian there. But yeah, we can't defend corners, to say on that topic, to save our lives. I really think Chelsea did look weak. I think when we put the pressure on them, they weren't sure how to contain it. We must have given them a huge confidence boost by letting them walk all over us yesterday, because they were vulnerable. The cracks were showing in that side, and you can see exactly why they've been bottling lead after lead in the past few weeks since Enzo Maresca said that they are not title contenders. They're showing why, and as comfortable a win it was for them, I think that just shows our quality, where our heads are at, where the morale is in that Wolves dressing room. I just want to touch on the Tosin goal as well. One thing I missed earlier, Cunha again. I hate to scapegoat him. I'm a real favourite of Cunha, but he was very lazy there. He was not pulling forward. Played him Tosin onside after Agbadou was unlucky with a deflection from a block shot from Reece James. I just don't think the mentality's there at all, Jacob. So Wolves, to start the second half, we came out looking competent, is the word I would say. We tried to put some pressure on Chelsea, quickly caving in once again. What was your opinion, Jacob? I'll start off with you. What did you think, seeing the team come out for the second half?
Disappointed, but also didn't expect anything less. It almost felt like, when I was telling myself that we were going to push on in that second half after equalised, I was almost forcing myself to feel that way. I almost didn't expect us to. But that second goal, was it Cucurella's goal, the second goal, or the third goal? It's kind of, I mean, Madueke's cut inside, which to start off with is far too easy. But when you've got a 3-man defence and he's able to pick out a little Spanish rat in the middle of all of them, you know, I don't know whether it's Santi to blame or Agbadou to blame, but he's got through the middle of both of them. One of them needs to pick him up, and he's never going to miss from that far out. And I mean, he's a bit of a wally. I don't know why he went to take his shirt off or whatever he did. It was a bit ridiculous. Obviously, as you can probably tell, I'm not a massive fan of the guy. I mean, who is? I don't think Chelsea fans are. But, you know, frustration, but yet again, what do we expect from this football club at this moment in time? It's almost like we get ourselves back in games, and then that's like, oh, that's our job done. Whatever happens, happens now. And as soon as that second goal went in, you saw the body language just by getting the ball. It was like, these players don't have it in them to go and get another goal, do it again. These players have given up. And that's how it felt for the rest of the game. Felt like these players are playing the second gear. Were just waiting to get on that bus and go home, to be fair. And to me, it's just another subpar, and that's overdoing it, I think, a subpar performance, because I thought that's probably the poorest performance out of our last three, where we've lost 3-0 to Forest and 3-0 to Newcastle.
Yeah, I honestly completely agree. I think we looked a lot more threatening in the Newcastle and Forest games than we did against Chelsea, even though it was the one we scored in with our goal just gifted to us, as we touched upon earlier. I think when Wolves came out, we looked competent at best. We looked like we may threaten. I was saying to my family at half time, who were hopeful, trying to remain optimistic, and I said, we all know what's going to happen. We're going to maybe have a chance if we're lucky, and then Chelsea are just going to cruise, and they did. That second goal, Madueke, a player who scored a hat-trick against us and called our city a terrible place. Yeah, how are we leaving him unmarked? Now, I don't care if Madueke's form this season hasn't been exactly scintillating. He clearly shows up against us, and those are the sort of players you need to have marked, as we'll find out later as well, for the third goal. Why is he allowed to just cut inside like that? He didn't even need to cut inside. He takes 2 steps left, and Agbadou just allows him to put the ball in. I thought that was Agbadou's only real bad moment. I thought he looked like our best defender a lot of the game. I think he really was one of the only people trying in that back line. Obviously still keen to impress upon his move from Ligue 1, but I just think it's shocking. I think Ait Nouri especially switches off in that box. How are you allowing Kukurea to just walk into the box so slowly instead of trying to contest him for the header? You give him enough time to control it down on his chest and just tap home in front of Jose Sarr. I just think it's really poor all round for that second goal. And Wolves are really caught napping. And how many times do we say that this season? I think it's shocking. Vitor Pereira said to Agbadou upon signing that in this league, you don't get a second to switch off or you concede. That was proven yet again yesterday. Jacob, why do we do this so often?
Well, it comes down to we blamed Gary O'Neill, which ultimately, yeah, terrible tactical decisions. But this group of players either don't want to be at Wolves or have just down tools for the season already. What really worries me is I said to my dad after the game, on paper we're a far better side than Ipswich, but we're a team full of players that know if we go down, they'll just get a move. They won't be playing Championship football next season. Whereas Ipswich have got a team that are fighting for people that want to be playing in the Premier League, people that know that this might be their only shot to play in the Premier League. And that want and that hunger is what will ultimately, I think, keep them up ahead of us. I don't think we have that fight. I don't think we have that fire in our bellies. As proven when we played Ipswich, that 97th minute, we downed tools. We were shattered as such, and they were still just as shattered. They've been under the cosh for 20 minutes. They still got themselves up to go and get that goal against us last minute. We'll get to the third goal, let you introduce it, but I've got lots of stuff to say about this third goal, the Madueke goal, which, like I said, it probably could just be implemented from any other podcast and put in here.
Yeah. We're going to sound like a broken record when we get to that third goal, but I completely agree when you're on about Ipswich. When I watch Ipswich's games, which I hate to say, I did not think I'd spend a lot of this season watching Ipswich play football, but here I am week in, week out, hate watching them, hoping they lose. just to help our situation in the slightest. And every game I've watched, they lose or fall behind from a winning position to draw, in the example of Fulham. But each of those games, they fight till the last whistle. They have.
Even on Sunday, sorry, they lost 6-0.
Yeah.
They lost 6-0 because they were a couple goals down and they tried to get themselves back in it. They didn't sit back, which ultimately allowed a quality team like Manchester City, as bad as they've been recently, to tear them apart. But they still had enough about them to go for it and try and get something out of that game.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what spoke volumes is Ipswich fans were still there till the 90th minute, losing 6-0 and still clapped their team off after that performance. And if I were an Ipswich fan, I would have done the same thing. They were really good. City, before they got that first goal, were under the cosh massively. Ipswich were really piling on the pressure. And Ederson actually had a lot to do that game.
Yeah.
The defence were really busy. Ipswich by no means made it easy for City, despite the scoreline for the casuals who might not have watched the game. When I watched Ipswich against Fulham, they stormed in the lead, and thanks to Raul Jimenez, Fulham ended up getting something from that game. When it's your former players in Jimenez and Adama getting goals against Ipswich in less than the past few weeks, who are doing more for your club than the players currently there, it says it all. Ipswich are a club with upward momentum. They are a club on a positive trajectory. They've had 2 consecutive promotions. They have fought tough and nail to be where they are, and they know they're overperforming. Their fans are jubilant with what they're seeing. They wouldn't have dreamed of this having been sat in League One. And here we are, having took our Premier League status for granted, with players who've downed their tools, who know they will have successful moves elsewhere afterward. They've got nothing to fight for because they're only there for themselves. And it's just so disappointing. I think it all stems from the top. Jeff Shee, his speech before the season saying, if you want success or Europe or trophies, to go and support another club. I think it just really set the tone for the squad season and the squad's mentality. They obviously just see the club as a stepping stone now, whereas our previous recruitment, it just wasn't like that. Players didn't come here expecting another move. They came here to fight for the badge on the shirt, and that's not what anyone seems to be doing lately. But I'm sick of this rant. I'm sure you could clip that from one of our previous week's podcasts, and we will be saying exactly the same thing because nothing has changed. And unless we, the fans, try and do something, I don't think anything will continue to change. Even then, it probably won't. But let us move on to the third goal. And I wonder how we're going to concede. Perhaps a set piece. We have now conceded 19 set piece goals this season in the Premier League alone. How is that possible? 8 more than joint second place, Southampton and Man United, interestingly. But wow. Jacob, you said you had a lot to say for this. I'll let you start off with it.
I mean, yeah, when you're conceding so many more than Man United from couple who, let's be discreet here, they conceded, twice directly from a corner in a week, and you're somehow worse than them, is crazy. We've conceded, 1 less goal off set pieces Liverpool have conceded all season in terms of any goals. But I was saying to my dad, I don't want to sound stupid, but this zonal marking is not only does it not work for Wolves, but how does it work for anything? If I'm starting here and my opponent's got that head start and the ball's being kicked from where I'm in line with, naturally, surely they're going to have an advantage when they're running and jumping to get the ball ahead of me. As to me, when I'm stood and having to go forward to get the ball, whereas they're running onto it, I don't see how this zonal marking ever became a real thing. I struggle to find any benefits to it as opposed to going man for man and trying to win those headers. But the goal, Palmer taking forever to take that free kick, get it in the box. To a lot of stick from the Wolves fans when he immediately shut us up. I have a few words to say about Wolves fans, actually. I thought good last night. I thought louder than the Chelsea fans who were quiet until we went 3-1 up. But certain things like booing Pedro Neto every time he got on the ball just didn't. Are you all right, mate? Didn't really make sense to me. Neto, for me, is a fantastic player who left a sinking ship for a much better football club, and you can't disgrace him for that. He is better than what is being shown here at the minute, and I don't think he left on bad terms either, Pedro Neto. But I'm not going to blame the Wolves fans for the lack of chanting when we went 3-1 down, because what we were seeing on the pitch was awful. And why should we get behind such a performance? But going back to the goal, it's so easy. You know, Chalobah, how tall Chalobah? He's got to be one of the taller centre-backs in the league. The guy's massive. He's unmarked. I mean, it should be his goal. Madueke steals it off him the last second, but it was going in regardless of the Madueke touch, which he celebrated like he'd just scored a Pele bicycle kick, in all fairness. But I don't want to, obviously, Madueke scored, fair enough. I also admired the way he played last night, which might annoy a few Wolves fans, seeing as he's not very popular with us. But I hadn't seen a winger play so wide in quite a while. He was almost hugging the touchline, which, if I was a Chelsea fan, would be quite refreshing to see, because we live in a world now where wingers are almost just inverted strikers, especially for us. Well, I don't know what position our wingers play at this point. Do they exist? Because there's no out ball for us. Well, it's them. It's every time they could find a Madueke, find a Neto, the young lad who came on. I forget his name, escapes me. For them in the second half, also played quite well. What's his name? I can't remember, but he played all right the second half as well. Even he was threatening us, and it's just so easy for Chelsea, as was epitomised by that third goal.
Yeah, just to touch on what you said about the Wolves fans, I completely agree. I think, much to some of our listeners won't be happy with me saying this, I think a lot of our fan base need to just suck it up. I think they need to stop being such wusses. Why are we booing every former player who comes to Molineux at the moment? Pedro Neto did not by any means leave on bad terms. I know there was this whole hoo-ha in that 6-2 loss where he was excited to get his first assist for the club on his... Well, he did not celebrate. I never understood this at the time. Pedro Neto is not a player who left on bad terms. He was a lot of people's favourite player when he did leave. He was seen by people outside. While we all knew Matheus Cunha was still our best player then, I would say, on average, Pedro Neto was seen as the Wolves man to people outside the club, and many thought we would struggle to cope without him, and which we have, in fairness. But Pedro Neto is not a player who we should be booing. He has been a loyal servant to the club. He did not throw his toys out the pram like Matheus Nunes, someone who deserves to be booed every time we play him. Like some of these other players who've left Wolves in bad terms, like Gibbs White, Pedro Neto is simply not on their wavelength. And to boo players like that shows how petty we have become as a fan base, how disgruntled with our own problems that we are projecting onto players who have just simply done what's best for their careers. If you are Pedro Neto, you are offered a significant amount more money, a better squad to play in, European football, and the chance to live in London. If that is you being offered that job compared to fighting relegation with Wolverhampton Wanderers, and let's face it, living in Wolverhampton, as Noni Madueke would not like himself, you're not going to say no to that opportunity. And it left the club a lot more financially better off, even if certain people at the club are to blame for us not spending that money outwise anyway. That is not down to Pedro Neto. And I really think that's just poor from Wolves fans. I think a lot of us have really took the last few years for granted in terms of our Premier League status, finishing high up in the Prem in our first 2, maybe 3 seasons. I just think we became very casual, very fair weather. And I think we really need to realise where we're at as a club right now. We don't have any kind of backbone to stand on to be booing Pedro Neto or moaning about things out of our control. That's why so much of our fan base is just so tired of it, so done with it. Like you said, after that third goal, we weren't as loud. Because what do we have to sing about then when these players have down their tools? But enough of the rant on Wolves fans. As a Wolves fan myself, it's the club that are causing this divide between us, and it shows all the problems in and around the pitch, really, when we're even turning against one another. Jose Sar's the player I'd like to highlight for this. What is he doing? He watches the ball almost go in slow motion across him for Noni Madueke to just tap home and steal the goal. It was going in anyway, but Jose Sá stands on his line staring at it. At least fly out, try punch it, kick it, something, block it. You don't just watch it go in front of you. I think the zonal marking, like you said, is extremely lazy, and I'm tired of talking about it. It doesn't work. We need to go for a man-for-man approach. We consistently don't mark the key aerial threats at all, if not by our smallest players. Why is this? Like, we are not going to defend set pieces when our tallest players are marking their smallest. That is not who their set piece deliveries are being aimed at. They're aimed at your Trevor Chalobahs, your big man who's going to get on the end of it and put that ball in the goal or across the goal for someone to tap home. Noni Madueke did what he's paid to do with finishing that chance and stealing that goal effectively, but I'm just sick and tired of talking about set pieces. Jacob.
Yeah, it's for me. And by no means am I saying employ one of these people, but there's a reason why when teams are struggling, you see people like Sam Allardyce, people like Roy Hodgson go into clubs. It's because when you are struggling, the first thing you have to do is go back to basics. Go man for man, clear the ball, play it out to the wingers, get crosses in instead of trying to walk it in. You're struggling. You can't afford to be playing this walking into the net football, this Pep Guardiola type marking. Go man for man, put your short man on the post, get the ball clear. I'd much rather see that. We'd all much rather see that. We don't have time to be playing this experimental football. We have to go back to basics. We have to get results. That's the way it is for me. Jose Sá, far too flat-footed. That's what it is on the line. He isn't on his toes as he was for a save in the first half. Well, he's on his toes. He makes a very good save. Went down injured afterwards, but he seems to go down injured every time he makes a save at this point. It's almost like he's just scaring us with the prospect of Sam Johnson coming on. Might be a little game he's having with us or something. But yeah, for me, last night was the first. I said to my dad, last night was the first time in a while I actually felt annoyed at Wolves losing. Because it's almost the expectation at this point. But last night, I think what hit me was obviously the travel. We had a bit of a game getting there as well. But when you've travelled all that way to watch a team on a Monday night just look like they can't be bothered to play 90 minutes in a privileged position, let's be honest, of a Premier League footballer, where they look like they can't be bothered to even, put that extra work in. Every second ball in that second half, Chelsea won. It was scoot up. It was like we'd defend something. And it would always be like a FIFA drill where you know how it resets when you get rid of the ball and then you attack again. It was just like that. It was just not even a game of ping pong. It was just a game of ping pong, but the guy can't send it back. It's just being hit at him the whole game. But yeah, a very frustrating night, which I think was summed up by a lot of the after the game antics on social media from certain players, certain comments from the manager about certain players that have raised a few eyebrows, but some of us agree with it, some of us don't. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Mateus Cunha, crazy head loss, I have to say. Calling out lies from journalists. In a video footage I've seen this morning, I just want to add, Cunha did seemingly go over to clap the fans, congratulate the opposition team, and then go into the tunnel. I'm not sure from your perspective in the stands if that was the case with Cunha coming over.
I didn't stick around to clap the players, to be honest. I didn't feel like they deserved applause after the performance.
I agree. I think it was more the players clapping the fans more than anything. I'm just disgraced with what we see on the pitch from Wolves recently. The body language is shocking. But to be outright calling journalists liars after the game when they're simply trying to do their job, I think it shows just how much attention Cunha is paying to the media. I hate to say it. I don't think he'll be listening to this podcast, so I think we'll be safe from his wrath. But I think he just really needs to shut the outside noise and leave it outside. I think he needs to, I hate to use the phrase focus on your football, but I think it's kind of apt at the moment. I think all the Wolves players in general, not to just single out Cunha, are focusing too much on this outside noise surrounding the club, this beratement of Wolverhampton Wanderers as it's become. Vitor Pereira having to call out individuals like Cunha for their body language. And I don't think he's wrong at all. I hate to say it, I think I've agreed with almost everything Vitor Pereira has been saying in his press conferences in recent weeks, because he is actually a manager who has enough experience and is tactically astute enough to pick up on the things Wolves fans have been saying all season surrounding the club and its footballing identity as of late. I'm just really disappointed with how disgraced, in honesty, the club's image has become this season. I think there are just so many incidents now, week in, week out. There is something new surrounding this club that makes you groan when you check your phone and see it. Being a fan of Wolves has not been fun for quite a while now. I'm not expecting fun when we're aiming to be realistically a mid-table Premier League team as it is at the moment, unfortunately. The highs of Europe are long gone and of that promotion squad. But, Jacob, where do you think we're at as a club right now?
I fully agree with what you said, and it's embarrassing being a Wolves fan at the moment, not because of the on-field results, but because of the constant petulance we're seeing from our players. You know, it almost seems like, well, in times of desperation, people always turn to blame something that isn't themselves. It's just human. We all do it. As we seen with Cunha last night. I mean, I've got the tweet here. He replies to Liam Keane, just simply, expressing the same thoughts that Vitor Pereira did. Obviously, he can't pop off at his manager like this, or I'd hope he doesn't. The tweet goes, this is Cunha's reply, liar, full stop, which is a very bold way to start a tweet anyway. I went to applaud them, congratulate the referees and the opposing players, which I don't know why you'd congratulate the referees, but each to their own. Then I went into the tunnel. And this is the part where it really strikes home with just how petulant Mateus has got here. Don't ever come and ask me to give you an interview again. Full stop. I'm not being funny, Mateus. Like I say, I'm addressing him personally, but I doubt he's listening to this podcast. A journalist isn't the reason why you're going to get relegated at the end of the season. Your body language was poor. It was picked up by 3,000 Wolves fans last night. Everyone around me mentioned that, and it's not a knock on how good Matheus Cunha is as a footballer. We all know that. But he epitomises where our club is at the minute, where it's just frustration after frustration after frustration. I was speaking to a friend I have who's a Newcastle fan who says it's simply a Brazilian thing because Bruno Guimaraes quite funnily went on a rant a few months ago when they were in bad form on Twitter as well. But I'd like to go to Vitor Pereira's comments now. He's a captain. He can be frustrated. He wants to win, but everyone in the dressing room wants to win. I do not like his body language. I understand it now. I will not understand it next time, which I agree with personally, with the body language. But there is an argument to be had where, is this a thing that should have been said privately to Matheus? Should have been made public? Publicly, let's say, unnerving your best player who is already being linked to a move away? Is that the smartest move? Maybe not.
I think it has to be at this current moment, Jacob. I think with the amount of noise being made by these petulant players in regards to Cunha making that tweet in the first place, as one of the club captains, why are you doing that? When you've already had Mario Lemina stripped of his captaincy and multiple fights after games this season, do you really want to add more fuel to that fire for the media when it's the media who you're labelling as your enemy? I think he has every right to be annoyed at the noise being made around the club when he is a player who will want to help us out, who will want to focus on our football. But like you said, that body language was picked upon by 3,000 Wolves fans yesterday and more across the world. It's there for all to see. Own up to it. Either make a comment or don't. Just move on from it. Focus on the next game. Focus on performances. Focus on your set piece deliveries. I think, honestly, I understand it, but I don't agree with it at all. I think Vitor is absolutely in the right making this comment to the press, because you need to show that you're not going to stand for it. You need to have that noise going to the outside that you're not a manager who's just going to be walked over, like how Gary O'Neill used to only say, he sees them as mates and he likes coffee and stuff like that. Gary O'Neill got walked all over in the press, and that's why the pressure got to him, and that's why he was making a lot of rash comments in the weeks subsequent to him losing his job. I think Vitor absolutely has to do that in his position if he doesn't want to be in the same boat come a few games. Say this losing streak goes on a bit longer, as I would not be surprised at all with our current fixtures not getting any easier. Arsenal, Aston Villa, Liverpool and Bournemouth all to come in the next few weeks. I'm sure we'll be repeating ourselves again on this podcast, going whatever I said last week. I just don't see how it gets much better in terms of form. And I think Vitor's absolutely in the right to say this. I think you have to have that being spoken to the press so that at least some people who are writing about the club from outside of it know that there's someone in there who isn't happy about it. Jacob, what are your thoughts?
I'd like to relate the tweet to a kind of personal thing for us too, and Sami, who's usually here. We've it says in our Twitter, it says on our Instagram, we are students currently studying sports journalism who aspire to be interviewing people like Matheus Cunha, who play for our football club, who ultimately we look up to. Obviously Matheus Cunha doesn't care about this, but what kind of precedent does it set where he's ridiculing, almost bullying a journalist on Twitter in such a way for simply having an opinion? What kind of precedent does that set to people like ourselves who are future journalists, where a footballer can take his frustration out on you? That's not what journalists are there for. Journalists are there to give an insight into what a player is going through on the pitch, what a player's thoughts are on the pitch, not to be called a liar. And Liam Keane is someone who certainly isn't a liar. He's a very respectable source around the Wolves fan base. So I think it's disgusting in all honesty. You raise a very good point about the Vitor Pereira thing. I think I'm sat on the fence of whether it should have been a private or public matter. But I can also see where if that's all it's going to take to make Mateus Cunha jump ship, then maybe he isn't, as stupid as it sounds, being our best player, maybe he isn't welcome at this football club. If that's as simple as it's going to be to make a player head get turned. And we heard whispers of stuff like this happening at Hertha Berlin with Cunha.
Yeah.
And a lot of us chose to ignore it, really, saying, no, he loves Wolves. And there's no doubt in my mind he does. That's why he gets so frustrated. But to me, it's getting... Usually you go to an away match and there's Cunha chance from minute 1 to minute 90. I think when the Cunha chance did get going yesterday, there was almost a kind of like muted aspect to it where that also speaks volumes to what's currently going on. And he will look like another Pedro Neto if he goes to another Premier League club, which I don't think he should be because, as I say, he's given a lot, but he isn't helping himself, similar to Mario Lemina in these last 24 hours.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you've said. I think in a professional standpoint, for me, you and Sammy, as the South Bank podcast is a student-run podcast at the end of the day, we are aspiring football journalists and sports journalists in general. I think it's disheartening to see a reliable source around the club we love, who is a respected professional in his industry. I think it's quite disheartening to see a Wolves player speak about him in such a manner as, do we want to be signing ourselves up to be spoken about like that by the people we look up to, role models for younger kids, role models even for adults who are fans of this club? We all look up to Mateus Cunha, and he is one of the players fans have had no doubt on their connection with in recent weeks and the past few seasons. But now it's looking in doubt. I hate to say it, I'm not sure how much his agent is to blame, as is often the case with South American footballers, unfortunately. He seems to be on speed dial to Fabrizio Romano, and Arsenal are keen and sniffing around this situation. And can you blame them for a player of Mateus' quality? Absolutely not. I hate to say it, I would not be surprised if he left before that deadline, if things continue the way they are. I would not be surprised in the slightest. I could easily see Cunha turning up next week against Arsenal and then them putting a bid in. And if this petulance continues from within the squad in the locker room, then he could easily be on the way out. And you did raise an interesting point. Is that someone we want at the club? If that's the attitude he's going to bring, I'm not sure, but then who replaces him? No one.
You don't replace a player like that, do you? That's the problem. Where if we are to lose him this January, you might as well enroll for the Championship next year, because we are going to get relegated. But ultimately, his attitude stinks, and that's going to rub off on other players, unfortunately. So I'm hoping this is just a one-off. You know, he's been under the weather, he's come back from injury, and it's all got too much for him. But we've seen enough from him where we know he has this in him, and I just hope it isn't going to come too regular occurrence and he get back to the form that we know he is capable of.
Yeah, I really hope so. Think I'm going to take him out my FPL this week.
I'll show him.
I think that's the only thing I can do. I even captained Isaac against us on Wednesday night. Had Palmer and Nicholas Jackson starting yesterday against us. I think it really shows how pessimistic I've become about Wolves. I love Wolves with all my heart, but it feels like every week I'm coming on this podcast and saying something negative and being pessimistic. But what is there to say at the moment other than that? I'm not sure if relegation might be fun in a way. Like, maybe we'll come straight back up and have fun. But yeah, I don't see that happening with our owners. I think we'll be left to rot, unfortunately. I'm just not sure what the future of Wolverhampton Wanderers holds in this moment of time. An interesting message Jacob sent me last night on his way home, clearly tired from the Chelsea travel, saying, what if we stayed up on the last day of the season would be limbs. Yeah, sure, that adrenaline rush should be insane in the moment. But is that what we want happening? I'm not so sure. I'm really just unsure, and everyone surrounding and in the club is as well, of what the future holds for us. And it's not something you want up in the air as fans, players. I would say the owners, but I don't think they seem to care. They probably have a plan in place for if we sell the club, if they don't, if we go down, if we don't. They'll have a plan in place either way to surely maximise their profit before offloading us. I'm just not sure how things are going to go, Jacob.
Yeah, you suggested that relegation might be fun. I had this conversation with my dad last night where it's not just a matter of going down, rebuilding anymore. There's such a gap between the Premier League and the Championship now, where you've seen Leicester and Southampton this year come straight back from 1 year out, and they're already so far behind the pack. Once you fall into that almost shark tank of the Championship, it's so hard to get back to where you were, even if you do go straight back up. I think if we do go down, we'll simply become, at best, a yo-yo team. If not, we'll be stuck in the Championship. That's the harsh reality of it, So that's what, when I've heard certain Wolves fans, and it's probably a reactionary thing to when we've just lost, say, oh well, I don't mind going down, no VAR or this, that, and that's the worst thing that can happen to this football club, because you won't enjoy it when we're going up, we're going down, we're going up, we're going down. And that's the best case scenario for me, because I just don't see a world where there isn't teams like us when we first came up anymore. There isn't teams like the Sheffield United team when they first came up. I suppose a counterbalance to it is Nottingham Forest, but they stayed up by the skin of their teeth when arguably they shouldn't have. They should have had another point deduction and gone down. So there's still that. There's still that to that argument. And I don't think that you reach those levels with, especially with these owners who, would they sell if went down? Probably, but who would buy us? Who would buy us in the Championship?
Yeah, I have to agree. If we go down to the Championship and we're sold, we're just another club. There's a lot more interesting investments there, is the way I put it. Everything you said just was the exact same things I said to my family yesterday when we were on about this topic. If we go down, that is all we will become. I don't really have high hopes for if we stay up or if we go down. I think we are unfortunately just a club stuck in limbo at the moment. I also agree that relegation would be the worst thing that can happen to this football club. Financially, there is no coming back from it. In this modern day Premier League, it's a league of powerhouses that's seemingly unchanging, except the three teams going up and back down. We don't want to become involved in that loop, because while it's fun, while you're chasing promotion, as soon as you get in the Prem, you're just sat at the bottom waiting for the season to end. We have a friend who is a Sunderland fan, and he was saying, as a promotion chasing team, it's just one of the most disheartening things there is. Having this thrill of chasing promotion, hoping to go up to the top division, knowing you're just going to plummet straight back down, even if you get there, hoping for parachute payments to keep you floating as a club near that top of the Championship, bottom of the Prem at best. And we can't let that happen to Wolves, but our owners seemingly don't care and are willing for that. In fact, I'm sure they wouldn't mind it, to be honest. They seem to love using us to tighten their purse strings, let's say. They love a bit of leverage coming from this club. They like selling our best assets, clearly, in the past few seasons. Now, I don't think any of that is completely on them. I think some of it's down to rules imposed on them from abroad, but that is not stuff we're here to get into. I just don't see any positives to this, unfortunately, and I really hate to be so negative on the podcast this week. For any of our listeners, it must not be a joy listening to this, but I really wish we could be here upbeat, excited, ready to get into it. I think when we came back after some decent form from Wolves, we were all quite excited to get back into the podcast after a break. And now it's seemingly back to business as usual for Wolves, who are quite deflated and dejected as a club, squad, fan base, you name it. I don't really have anything left to add because things just look so bleak right now. Jacob, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously love Wolves. We have a podcast about them. But I'm sick and tired of talking about the same old things week in, week out. The owners aren't good enough. We can't defend set pieces. Our players aren't good enough. It's so disheartening to just never have a change here. It just feels like a social experiment, this football club at times. It's like, how much can we put these poor people through before inevitably just pulling the plug, which is relegation? It's almost like we'll just tease them with it. We'll tease them with it. And they have been teasing us with it for the last few years. Like, people forget the season Lopetegui came in. We were awful. We stayed up because of Lopetegui. As much as we don't like him, we stayed up because of his results. That's by the skin of our teeth. If I remember rightly, in November before the World Cup break, me and you were in the stadium debating what players come and go next season when we're in the Championship, what loan players we can utilise next year in the Championship. And unfortunately, I feel like that's going to be the reality now because I've almost come to the conclusion, my dad came to the conclusion that we most likely will go down. We're fortunate in the fact that there's 3 poor teams that's given us a chance of staying up. Because any other year we'd be certainly down. But we've got no one to blame but ourselves for it, ultimately. A lack of investment over the since COVID. This stems back all the way to not backing Nuno, not, not understanding that the man misses his family. And, I know there was Chinese regulations in the way, but look at what that man's doing at Nottingham Forest now. That could have been us with the slightest bit of investment. You didn't have to invest loads into that squad. It was already a good team. A bit more investment, and we'd be nowhere near where we are now. It's just been a slow decline from us. If this was ultimately always going to be the end goal, and we're in the end game now, where we've had these good years, but it feels like they're coming to an end, and the club is just toxic. The club needs a reset. The club needs everything. The stadium still needs a renovation. We need a new bunch of players. We need a lot of everything. We're in desperate need of a rebuild in a climate where rebuilds are practically impossible. So it feels like a double-edged sword, of which the future seems like a scary place for Wolverhampton Wanderers now for me. I don't know whether you agree.
Completely agree. What don't we need replacing? What don't we need? Where don't we need, in new infrastructure? I think as a club, we're just on a downward trajectory and have been since. Like you said, with Nuno, he left and was the real warning sign. The golden years really came under Nuno. Man who is bringing so much to Nottingham Forest now right in front of our eyes, which is just so hurtful to watch, honestly, as a Wolves fan, because we remember the heights of Europe when we were there, and we know that could have been us with a few additions. And Nuno left because our owners couldn't promise him those. And he said, well, I won't be able to take you any further then. And Fosun were just happy to stagnate, to just stay where we were. But then it became less than that. And they were happy to just stay mid-table and then just stay in the league. And then now they don't even seem to care about that. It all goes back to the same problems, like you said. I think the real spark to the end of Wolves was Raul Jimenez's injury. Unfortunately, it all goes back to that moment. It's just been downhill ever since. Then Nuno leaving. Like you said, we don't like Lopetegui at Wolves, but I'm grateful thankful to him for keeping us up that season. Let's not forget we were bottom at Christmas. I just think it's really pathetic how this club has been managed. And as fans, I think the fact we've all gone from a big happy family to divided amongst ourselves, a lot of empty seats at the stadium, a lack of atmosphere compared to what it used to be. I think it just shows how petulance and toxicity runs through this club's foundation now. And the cracks are showing and the writing's on the walls. I don't see things getting much better, to answer your question, no.
Yeah, but to be more positive, all our listeners, the ballot opens tomorrow for Liverpool away. And if you'd like to fund our transfers for the rest of the month, we might buy a loan player if you all buy a ticket to Liverpool away. So go and buy tickets to Liverpool away.
Woo! Go and buy for Wolf, as Jeff Shee would say, as he doesn't even know there's an S at the end of our club's name. I remember the emails. I was seeing a lot of these reposted yesterday about how Jeff is saying, like, I hope Wolf will make you happy in the new season, to Manny saying a figure we will all know around the club. Wolves are not making anyone happy this season, Jeff. What are you on about? Why did you not invest more in the summer? Why are you not investing more now? The fact that annoys me is, under Lopetegui, we were in a similar position to this, probably a better position, weirdly, even though the table didn't reflect it at the time, than we are now. Why are you not realising you need to do the same thing you did then, which is invest in this squad or we are plummeting down? At least loosen your purse strings a little, and get some of that Chinese buck out. Like, you need to buy players. We need to pay if we're going to stay in this league. We're not going to stay up because we play good football. We're going to stay up because we have a better team than Ipswich individually. They are a better team. We have better individuals. And that is the only thing keeping us in this fight for relegation right now. I will be one of the idiots entering into that ballot tomorrow as soon as we can, because I want to go to Anfield, because who knows how long till we're back in the Prem if we go down. I'd be going more to watch Liverpool almost than Wolves. I go to every Wolves game expecting a miracle now, which says a lot. I'll be there Saturday for Arsenal. I have one or two friends who are Arsenal fans, but I've just said, we all know what's going to happen. We have the worst set-piece record in the league for goals conceded. And they have the most set-piece goals scored. Jacob, let's move on to how we think Arsenal will look. But I think I've said the whole game there already, really.
Yeah, do we even have to preview it? The best team in terms of scoring off set pieces against the worst team defending them, they'll probably score about 10. So, yeah, not looking forward to it.
No.
Don't expect anything from it, but knowing Wolves will probably turn up and give them a good game, because that's what we seem to do against the better teams.
Didn't last night.
Well, yeah, but are Chelsea one of the better teams at this point? They've been on terrible form themselves.
True.
I go back to like Man City at home, where we actually look like we're bothered. Oh, well, people might be watching this game. We're playing Man City. Let's play well. Oh, people might be watching us against Liverpool. Let's play well. But ultimately, it was a stupid mistake that cost us against Liverpool. But no, Arsenal for me is a recipe for disaster. Like you say, the set pieces. Again, Saliba out at the moment. They are vulnerable. If Cunha can turn up the way we know Mateus Cunha can, maybe another audition similar to what we saw against Man United on Boxing Day, maybe something can be done there, but I highly doubt it. For me, when I look at the team, Rodrigo Gomez has got to come back in to start.
Yeah, 100%. Our brightest player.
Yeah, came on for a cameo last night at 3-1 down and looked like one of the only players that could be bothered to get forward. I'd like to see, I know he's been poor lately, I'd like to see the Dawson come back in, I believe. I don't, as much as I love Doherty, I don't think he's done anything wrong. I think the right centre-back experiment has gone on a bit too long at this point. I think he is starting to get caught out through that like touch of pace. Totti's about another week out, I believe Vitor Pereira said, which I don't expect him to. Well, perhaps he'll be on the bench, but I don't expect him to be involved in the starting lineup.
We are crying for him back.
Yeah, and I mean, I said it to you last night, didn't I? I mean, I'm a fan of Totti, but when you're crying for Totti Gomez to come back, because Totti Gomez is either a 10 out of 10 or 1 out of 10. So when you're crying for him, you know times are rough. For me, I'd also deploy an extra man in that midfield, as we spoke about earlier, for Arsenal. I know that contradicts the Rodrigo Gomez statement, but could we see Rodrigo Gomez coming on that left-hand side for Norway? I wouldn't mind seeing it.
I would like to.
Or maybe even Semedo could play on that left-hand side again. I don't think he had a bad game last night. I think it neutralises him going forward. So maybe not. I'd like to see Can I bring myself to say Larson starting? Or do I want to see Guedes and Cunha start up front? Maybe. But I think Larson maybe give him a chance with someone next to him. He might be better with someone playing off him, as poor as he was last night, but he's got to put in a hell of a shift on Saturday if he wants to keep the fans on side. I don't want to say keep his place in the team, because who does he get dropped for? Hee-Chan Hwang, which is like you're dabbling in a worse pond there, but I've rambled on too much. Probably predict about a 3-0 Arsenal, 4-0 probably. I don't expect much out of this game, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm going to say a 4-1 Arsenal, 3 set-piece goals, 1 in open play for each of us. I want to play on from a few things you said then. I'd like to see us line up in possibly a 5-3-2. I think we really need that extra man in midfield. We are just suffering so much from it. And we don't seem to have much attacking threat with 3 up top, so can't hurt anymore having just 2. I'd like to see Rodrigo Gomez come in for Ait-Nouri. I think I do want to keep Semedo in that squad as our captain and one of our more positive, and even in this bleak of a season, he is one of our more consistent players. I think Doherty, it's not his fault how things have gone, but I'm not sure Dawson is the right replacement. I just don't see who we bring Doherty for. I think that's why we're crying for Totti back, so Agbadu can move on to what is his preferred right-hand side. He hasn't even had a chance to play on that, and he's looked quite solid. So I'm hoping when Totti comes back onto his left, it gives us more directness in our play. But Totti is a player we all expected to be replaced in the Wolves side a few years back, and yet here we are crying for him back now. I think it really shows how our defence has just gone down and down and down, and I think that's what's ultimately made us suffer since our promotion from the Premier League, is not necessarily our attacking quality dipping. As we've seen this season, goals aren't necessarily our biggest problem. Our backline is like a leaky cauldron. We went from the stability of Cody, Bolly and Says, 3 leaders in the dressing room, all offloaded, and then slowly scaling down and down. And I just don't see how things get better. We really need another centre half this window. There were reports last night, very late on, about how Diego Carlos's move from Aston Villa to Fenerbahce had stalled, and Wolves had apparently put in a 10 million bid. I'm not against signing another centre half. I also think he does have quality, but there's 2 key things to say here. One, an Aston Villa player, but I can kind of look past that. I don't hate them as much as Albion, and I don't care about them as much as Blues either. But he is a player who, in a position we need right now, and yet he spends more time in the hospital bed than he does on the training pitch. So why is that an answer we look to?
For me, I don't want to see that signing. I know we need a centre-back, but his injury record speaks for itself. Also, when he has come in, I thought he's been gash. I think he's really struggled. Even going back to our game at Villa Park, he was at fault for our goal, giving the ball away to Mateus Cunha on the edge of the box. I don't think. I really liked him at Sevilla. I remember when we played Sevilla in the Europa League. Him and who was it he played with at the back? They were phenomenal as a pair.
Koundé.
Yeah, him and Koundé at the back were phenomenal together. But he hasn't seemed to hit the heights in the Premier League, and he's really struggled. For me, he isn't big either. He's another
No.
centre back, and for me, call me old fashioned, but a small centre back doesn't work for me. Same with Lisandro Martinez, people like that. I don't rate them in the slightest for me. I'll go back to you. I can see you can say something.
I completely agree. I watched Everton Spurs this weekend, and I think the amount of height Everton have in their back line is exactly what makes them so defensively solid. While Everton are in a similar position to us in the table, they've had almost the opposite problem versus while their defence is solid, they cannot score. We can score, we can't not concede. If only Wolves and Everton could combine into some super team, we'd probably be higher up the table. We'd probably be higher up the table with our attack and their defence. I think they have a lot of height in their back line, and Spurs could not deal with it. Whereas Wolves, every cross, every set piece, it just goes in. I don't understand what's going on. There was a lot of scrutiny from the Monday Night Football team on Jose Sarr this season, how poor he's been, and I do agree. But at the same time, we have no one to put in there. We're not going to sign a new number one this window, as I think that just upset the dressing room so much. Having John Stone, who's unhappy already, as he couldn't become number one because he's simply not good enough. Sarr unhappy himself with probably the team's performances, but he should be with his own too. I just don't see any real answers, and I think that this is unfortunately what spells relegation for Wolves.
Yeah, that's exactly it. While we're on the discussion of transfers, probably where we'll end off is a bit of a bleak note. Manu Silva, obviously looks set to come to Wolves this week. Decided to go to Benfica, which, in all honesty, can you blame him? The biggest club in Portugal. He doesn't have to leave Portugal. Got European football, Champions League as opposed to Championship. So I think also if he didn't want to be here, then would we really want him? No. Also heard reports from Portugal that he isn't as special as the like of Vitinha as those players. So have we missed out that much? No, but it's still frustrating to see a player ultimately slip through the cracks once again. How many times have we seen it with going back Renato Sanchez, going back, had the chance to sign Vitinha permanently, didn't do it. We saw just this past window when Kevin Danso didn't want to come to Wolves. We're just a club where no one wants to come to. Well, no one who's anyone wants to come to. That's the problem. So you're scraping the barrel of who you can bring in at this point. I don't know whether you agree with that, whether you think we are still an attractive prospect to come to.
No, I completely agree. I think we're scraping the bottom of the barrel purely because of our owners. It's the lack of ambition and no clear sporting project that is why players don't want to come to us. How are you as a player going to further your career by coming to Wolverhampton Wanderers in this moment in time? Manu Silva, prime example. You just listed every reason why Benfica is a better option than Wolves, and all you had to say was where the two clubs are at right now. I just don't see why any player would want to come to us. Kevin Danso, another example. Lens, European football the last 2 seasons. Why would you come to Wolves? Why would that do your career any good to go to Wolves? A club with seemingly no ambition to even stay in the league, let alone push up to the higher ends of the table. We're seeing clubs like Bournemouth, Brighton, clubs with, in comparison to us, no history. But they are clubs ran well. They are clubs with good sporting directors and good board members making good decisions to create history for those clubs. Why are we a club who Wolves seem to love to make money over our history with the Hod Red Heroes documentary, LA Wolves documentary? We seem to be spending more on documentaries on our esports team than we do our senior squad. They seem to love to say how we are a historic powerhouse. They have no intention of bringing us back to the heights of the club's previous history or any remote heights regarding its present history. I just don't see how things improve.
Yeah, and there's such a disconnect at the moment. I find myself more interested in not even just not Wolves, other sports. I've been watching a lot of the NFL playoffs lately. I find the darts more interesting. I'm more interested to talk about the boxing and the football because there's just that much of a disconnect at the moment. And it simply comes from the fact of Wolves. It's not that we're doing bad. I can deal with a loss. It's the lack of determination. It's the toxic feel. It's the petulance. It's all of that. And I think we've covered it perfectly on this podcast, to be honest. It epitomises what we feel at this moment.
Yeah, if any of our listeners have stuck around from us sad and depressed while on about the game, I think we have had a good discussion towards the end of this. I'm just really struggling to find any positives because there aren't any, and I need to stop looking for them in honesty and face the facts. Wolves are just not there right now, and I don't think we have any more to say, unfortunately. I hope there's some new centre-back signing out the blue in before we have our next podcast. A new midfielder attacking signing, but do we see it? We don't. And I think on that note, we'll leave you and hope to see you next week after our game against Arsenal. If you're willing to listen to us here more about conceding set pieces, more about a lack of attacking intent, you know where to come. Thank you for listening to the South Bank podcast. We will see you next week. I've been your host, Cameron Gorman, and I've been joined by Jacob Jones. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to follow the South Bank podcast on all social media platforms and listen to us on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or the KIC Radio app. Thank you for listening and goodbye.
And don't forget to buy Liverpool away tickets.
This is KIC Radio. On the KIC Radio app and online at kicradio.co.uk. This is KIC Radio.